Hello, everyone. My name is Pumulo Sooli, Principal Consultant at the East and Southern African Management Institute, which is based in Arusha, Tanzania. I'm going to make a presentation on the research which I conducted, entitled Corporate Social Responsibility in Extractive Industries and Poverty, Myth or Reality for Developing Countries. Firstly, I'll give you the outline of my presentation. I'll start with the article publication date. Then I'll look at the introduction, the methodology, the Corporate Social Responsibility Review or CSR review, where I'll look at the various dimensions of poverty. Then I'll discuss the findings, under which I'll have the justification for CSR, the multinational corporations, the business linkages, partnerships, and lastly, the conclusion. The article or the research article was published by the International Journal of Science and Research, Volume 9, Issue 2 of February 2020, and the paper ID is ART 2020-760. The article discusses a variety of responsibilities assigned to companies by their investors, community, and other stakeholders. It recognizes the mutual relationship between companies and society in general. It elaborates on why companies engage in social investments and concludes the business case scenario for investors, showing that their responsibility is actually not to tackle poverty per se. Now, corporate social responsibility or CSR is a general concept practiced by corporations. The concept recognizes that companies have a variety of responsibilities which are assigned to them by investors, the community, the law enforcement agencies, and all other stakeholders. And even though the aim of extractive industries is to maximize the returns to investors, their actions affect people well beyond their transactions. In the methodology, or the methodology used, an extensive literature review on CSR in extractive industries was used. The literature considered multiple viewpoints, perspectives, and positions on the resource case theory and its implications. The literature review also looks at the corporate social responsibility strategies and the responsibilities companies and investors placed on them. For the review itself, the article tackles CSR issues from the point of view of society and management. According to Tudor of ETR of 2007, he contends that both companies and society have a mutual relationship. Finance of 2003 also states that both society and management rely on each other to realize their ambitions. The review also noted that companies should practice moral, ethical norms and values. There should be a social responsibility for a company to be proactive in practices that benefit society. CSR, according to the research, noted that it is actually a journey rather than a destination, and there is need for constant adjustments. When looking at the dimensions of poverty, the research noted that poverty has many dimensions. Concept is better understood by using non-monetary indicators, and most writers contend that having indicators of deprivation, that is non-monetary, adds the ability to capture poverty and social exclusion. Measuring the direct contribution to poverty alleviation is not easy and politically sensitive because poverty is multifaced and too complex. Under the dimensions of poverty, the research found out there are various manifestations of poverty. This includes lack of income, lack of productive resources sufficient to ensure a sustainable livelihood, hunger and malnutrition, ill health, limited or lack of access to education and other basic services, increased morbidity and mortality from illnesses, homelessness and inadequate housing, unsafe environment and social discrimination and exclusion, and also the lack of participation in decision making. Now, the simplest and most widely used poverty measure is what is known as the headcount ratio. This examines the percentage of the population which is poor. The other measure is what is known as the poverty gap. This identifies the aggregate by which the poor people fall below the poverty line. The World Bank identifies poverty as the people's inability to have the minimum standards of living. Writers like Salke and Foster of 2008 use the intersection method. This approach, according to the research, found out that it requires one to be deprived in all dimensions before being identified as poor. The research also noted that and acknowledged that poverty reduction is not a one-man task. It involves all the players, that is, those engaged in factors of production, like governments, NGOs, and the mining sectors, which are the focus of this study. Under the findings and justifications for CSR, the research noted the business case for CSR seems to be more compelling than poverty reduction. Extractive industries lack human resources to plan and execute projects, as CSR initiatives were not part of the larger development plan. The research also found out that to obtain competitive advantage, governments favored those with CSR strategies towards society. And they also found out that more firms were likely to listen to those who pose the greatest threats to their operations. The other item found out was managing external perceptions. CSR has been used for public relations purposes. And the research also noted that it was used for keeping employees happy. So organizations demonstrated to employees that it is for development. The other finding by the research was that the corporate social responsibility statements are made as a form of window dressing to deceive the public, because it provides a framework through which analysts can be able to distinguish between intention and realization. The study also found out that multinational corporations in extractive industries are in business for profit. Codes of conduct are seen to be used to address poverty, even though when you look at them closely, most extractive industries develop these codes which refer to relative poverty and the working poor. The codes of conduct for the corporations are normally weak and are not objectively monitored for compliance. And the research found out that companies prefer internal monitoring of compliances and leave out issues like poverty alleviation, which are too complex to analyze. The other findings were that the multinational corporations take into account the economic status of the economies they will invest in. When engaging in resource extraction, the role is first and foremost to contribute to efficient production, while as a minimum, respect the laws of the host country. The host country, therefore, including the government, civil society, and so forth, need to be reassured that the presence of the multinational corporation will raise the general living standards of the people. All the extractive industry stakeholders enter encounters with presuppositions about each other's motives, culture, and rights. The research also found out something about the indigenous people. The indigenous people believe that they are part of the land. Their will is more important than time. For the indigenous, the research found out that the ore to them has to be extracted in the most shortest possible time and at the least cost. Governments, the research found out, are more concerned about receiving timely shares of taxes and fees. This is according to Downing ETL 2002. The other findings were that assessing the contribution of extractive industries to poverty reduction strategies can be through their linkages with small-scale businesses. The number of SMEs incorporated in the supply chain is important. The linkages include activities such as the inter-firm cooperation between the SMEs subcontracting, between large and small businesses, and also the informal networks. The foreign direct investment, or FDI, can result in benefits for the host country. Benefits result in improved productivity due to the forward and backward linkages with the multinational corporations. Backward linkages will normally be those which are formed when the multinational corporations have a relationship with the suppliers, while the forward linkages will come from contacts with the customers. The productivity spillovers from FDIs operate through linkages between the multinational corporations and the local suppliers. And the research found out that the host countries benefit from technology by the multinational corporations, hire workers trained by the multinational corporations, introduce modern production methods, and have what is normally referred to as the market access spillovers. The partnerships, according to the research, were seen as those to overcome three forms of failures. One, governance failures for governments, that is the concerns over official development aid case, from which aid-dependent countries suffer. Two, the market failures, where companies cannot implement proactive CSR strategies without involving their stakeholders. And three, good intention failures. This is where the NGOs have little efficiency in implementing ideas on development. Under partnerships, this, according to the research, was seen as a means rather than an end to development. The study noted that the SMEs would benefit more from government support than large companies. And governments lacked business experience and also lacked transparency and clarity in whatever that they're doing to supervise these types of partnerships. The research also noted that governments cannot shape what companies undertake with regard to development, because this is linked to their core activities. Instead, government should concentrate where corporate and development objectives meet. The research has several conclusions. One, the research concludes that extractive industries investors, like all investors, will aim for a fair return on their investments That is, they will use all sorts of ways to ensure that there is maximization of returns. After all, that is why they invested in the country and in the industry. 2, the study showed that extractive companies determine what it is that they view as essential strategies for poverty alleviation. It is therefore up to the governments and other concerned stakeholders, especially in extractive industries, to ensure that there is close monitoring and compliance of the extractor to all the conditions agreed upon. 3, the deviations from agreed upon conditions should be discussed and amendments initiated with extractive industries due to their delicacy and importance to national economies. It is therefore the responsibility of host governments to provide a conducive investment environment, while at the same time reinforce the conditions of the agreement with the investors, especially with regard to poverty reduction. CSR, according to the article, is therefore a myth. Thank you very much for listening to the presentation, and I hope you'll be able to look at the article and read a bit more on the details so that you can extract what exactly was found out through the research that I conducted. Thank you very much, and God bless.